still getting the hang of like how far away I can hold the camera with the wind and still have y'all hear my voice. I feel like it changes on different days, the way that the wind affects the microphone. Anyway, I'm here to talk about static composting today, mostly because I'm mixing up a static pile right now, and that feels like a good time to talk about it. Maybe some of you are like me, I'm assuming that you are, and that, you know, I really love composting. I hate sending any organic waste to the landfill. It makes me super upset. I really want to use all of my organic waste, especially food waste, because it's such a resource. But I often don't feel like I have the time or the willingness to go through the whole process of building a hot compost pile and managing it, you know, getting all the ratios exactly right to get the temperatures to be what I want, and then flipping the pile. And it's a lot of labor to really do a hot compost pile the way that I want to do it. I'm very particular about how I want my hot compost pile to be set up and how I want it to work. And it requires a lot of labor. I could be less particular, but then I'm not getting all the benefits that I want out of the hot compost, and it's still a lot of work, even if I'm being less particular about temperatures and that sort of thing. Hot compost just is a lot of work. That's not a bad thing. It's rewarding. It's an appropriate tool. But a lot of the times I find myself having more waste than I can deal with using just hot composting thermophilic strategies. So in that situation, a really nice tool to use is static composting. Static composting is really simple. All you're doing is mixing up organic materials, stuff that was recently alive, in a pile, and you're going to let it sit for a really long amount of time, and you're not going to do anything to it. You don't have to flip it. I mean, it's pretty wise, I would say, to make sure that the pile stays hydrated. Maybe you water it sometimes. But that's basically it. You're just going to let it sit. Now, typically a static compost pile, you might mix it up and then let it sit for anywhere from 1 to 2 years. So it's a long process, but there's hardly any labor other than mixing the pile, maybe occasionally watering it, and then, you know, spreading it when you're done, when it's finished compost. Now, in my hot composting video, I talked a lot about, you know, selecting materials, getting the right ratios to get the pile to get hot, and the different types of materials. There's carbon materials, which we have over here, some wood chips, anything that's carbon. Sometimes these are called brown materials. This is stuff like mostly things from trees, things that are typically brown, fall leaves, wood chips, sawdust, maybe straw, hay. And then you have your high nitrogen and your green sources. So this is stuff like food waste, you know, maybe if you have grass clippings, or if you have a lot of weeds, or, you know, green plant material, manures and that sort of thing. These are all very high nitrogen, often called greens. Now, when we're doing hot composting, we get really down in the nitty gritty of like, what's the difference between using manures versus using food waste, and how much, you know, how does that contribute to heat generation in the pile? In a static compost setting, we don't care about the pile getting hot, so we don't need to be worried about adding a ton of high nitrogen green food. You definitely want to have some in there. It's still the basic gist is you're mixing greens and browns, but you can go a lot heavier on the carbon, the brown materials in a static pile, because you don't need that heat that comes from a lot of green material. So, you know, try different ratios, see what works for you. I don't have an exact recipe to recommend today. I just have these 4 buckets of food waste that I want to deal with so I can free up the buckets. And I don't want them sitting around too long in the buckets anyway. And so I'm just going to mix up however much it takes me to feel like I have an appropriate amount of browns to these 4 buckets of greens. I'm going to be composting in this little fence ring that I built. Static compost could literally be as simple as just mixing this stuff up and dumping it on the ground in a little hill or mound, right? That could be a static compost pile. I kind of like these rings because it keeps the walls of the pile vertical, which makes it harder for weeds to establish in the pile as compared to a gentler slope. Here you can see a static pile I mixed about 6 months ago, and you can see there's already some grasses starting to climb up into the pile. This is okay. You know, ultimately any sort of weed or plant growing in the pile is going to contribute positively, or it's going to increase, you know, the biodiversity of the pile, right? The microbial biodiversity. Having plants is good. Any plants are going to be dumping exudates into the soil and improving the microbiome. The flip side is grasses like this can leave rhizomes in the pile. They can be tough to remove. Weeds can go to seed. Then you might have seeds and rhizomes and things like that that you don't want to spread into your garden or landscape when you spread the compost. So managing what plants grow in the pile is definitely a big consideration. I think with this pile here, I think ultimately I might have to tarp this to smother out some of the grasses at some point, but for now I'm just gonna let them do their thing. I think that having a vertical wall of the pile is going to help, like I said, prevent unwanted plants from getting in there. We'll see. I'm not too worried about it if they do. There's a lot of different ways that you could build a confined area for the static compost pile. You could use pallets, you could use wood. There's all sorts of, you know, fart around on the internet. There's a lot of great ideas out there. Maybe you come up with your own great idea. I like these fence rings. They're easy. Kind of nice with the fence rings. They're easy to move. So some areas I have dedicated to compost almost permanently, but over there, that's going to be a temporary 1 or 2 year static pile. I'll then remove that material, use it somewhere, and move the ring. And where that compost ring was is going to be a great place to plant a perennial in a year or 2. All right, we added in our first layer of wood chips. Now we're going to dump some food waste on there. Look at all that good nastiness. Oh yeah, that's some good material right there. Good stuff. Smells great. And here we go. We've just continued to add more carbon on top of that. Now we're going to switch back to food waste. Just keep going. I'm going to add some leaves in here in a little bit. All right, just like that, we're done. That was less than 30 minutes. 4 full buckets worth of food waste, 2 full wheelbarrows, and 2 buckets of fall leaves. Now we do nothing for 1 to 2 years. Absolutely nothing, except I am gonna go clean these buckets off. I don't know if you can see, I did make a little depression in the middle of this. Hopefully when it rains, we'll be able to infiltrate and catch more water in this pile that way. We don't want all the water sheeting off the top. So that's a little tidbit.